Now, I was gonna talk about Little Big-Eared Barry O'Kenyon and his war against Whitey, the very crackeredly gentleman known as Whitey. But that's a different story for a different day. In fact, we're not even going to do that on YouTube. We'll do that one over on Rumble, where we're a little safer as to what we can say and what we cannot say, and what we will damn sure keep our mouths shut about. Now, instead, we will talk about a mythological creature, or cryptid, in the Pacific Rim, in the nation of the Philippines, on several of the islands. There are more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines. The creature that I'm going to talk about, or the humanoid being that I'll talk about, has been seen on many of the islands. Now, of course, just as anywhere else, the city people will laugh and say, oh, that's just a mythology or superstitious belief among the more provincial people, the people that live near the jungle areas. There's no actual truth to it. But when you talk to these people in these areas, they appear to be most sincere, very honest, upright people, with no motivation to lie about their experiences or their beliefs, their customs, things that they've seen in their land, in their region, in their local area. The being that I'm referring to in many countries is known as the duende. It is also called the duende in certain parts of Philippines. And on the island of Mindanao, it is called the Pendak. Notice the similarity in the language. Pendak in the Philippines, and the orang pendek in nearby Indonesia. Now, it's a little different over in Indonesia. In Indonesia, most of the people, including the city people, will tell you, oh yeah, it's out there. It exists. Not all, but most. The Philippines, it's a little different. The Philippines is pretty much just the more provincial folk. The folk who live away from the cities, close to the jungle's edge, and in some cases in the jungle itself. Apparent similarities between the languages of the southern Philippines and the languages of nearby Indonesia. I guess that would be, Javanese? But we know on the historical record, the archaeological record, that there was indeed a known species of tiny humanoids in that area known as Florencia man, that lived side by side with modern humans, Neanderthals. That's on the record. So certainly they have existed. The point of my story here today is to show that they do indeed still exist. Eyewitness Cristobal Saladas says that she awoke one night in April or May of 2002 in her family's provincial home on a rice plantation in far southern Philippines, Mindanao. She got up in the middle of the night to get something to drink, went into the family's kitchen, turned on the light, and there was a being roughly 2 feet tall, very human looking, surprisingly Caucasian looking, with light colored skin, light-colored hair and eyes. She said that in its hands were some salted dried fish and some pandesal. Pandesal being a Filipino, I guess like a biscuit. Very delicious, actually, especially when warm with cheese. Dried fish. Filipinos often leave salted dried fish out on their countertop overnight. A lot of them, at least back then, early 2000s, didn't even have refrigerators. However, they are a rapidly modernizing country. Miss Saladas goes on to say that as soon as she turned on the light, the tiny person looked at her with extreme surprise on its face. And then in the blink of an eye, like lightning, it ran right by her and out the door and out the front door of her family's home. She said that it was barefoot and that as it ran by her and out the door that it sounded much like the bare feet of a child, only faster. She said that it was otherwise nude except for a loincloth and a toboggan-like headwear on its head. That's interesting. Do they make their own clothes? What do they make their clothes out of? Animal hides? Woven materials? They have the self-awareness and the level of sophistication to their thinking to want to cover their genitals. That's very interesting. Do they have a religion? Religious beliefs? It's very interesting indeed. Obviously they have certain morals and principles. Where do they get those morals and principles from? Where do they reside when they're not raiding people's homes in the middle of the night for food? Well, the local people in that area, southern Mindanao, who believe in this being, say that they live underground, which I also find very interesting. 34-year-old Elizondo Mercado says that in 2009, when he was working on a coconut plantation, also in that area, just outside of Zamboanga City, he says that he and two co-workers were traveling by foot via a footpath through the jungle to an area where they would be working that day, when four of these tiny humanoid creatures ran across the path in front of them, just mere feet in front of them, and they were able to get a sufficiently good look at them to know that these were not monkeys or wild pigs running across their path. They were tiny humanoids, two of them carrying some sort of crafted club-like weapon. They were a very small, 1.5 to 2 feet tall, and had the faces of men. He said he and his friends were all very surprised, and that none of them had ever seen one of these creatures before, but they had grown up hearing the tales from the men about the Pendak who lived underground, came up occasionally to hunt and plunder on the surface. 74-year-old Reynoldo Baclan says that in the 1950s, he and some friends were traveling to a remote jungle waterfalls area where some of the people in that area used to like to go and swim occasionally, cool off from that hot Southeast Asian jungle heat and humidity. When they arrived there, it was apparent that no one else was there that day, just young Reynoldo and his friends. The swimming hole area where they would be spending the day was surrounded by hills and cliffs covered in thick jungle vegetation. They had only been there for about an hour, he said, when they started to realize that they were not alone as there was movement among the flora and on the rock ledges overhead, rustling among the lily pads and the snapping of twigs. They didn't pay too much attention to it at first. After all, it could be dogs. And moments later, one of the boys let out a startled shriek and insisted that he saw the face of a human look down at them over the ledge. The others did not believe him, but they decided to watch for the next several minutes. Movement over here, movement over there, rustling here, rustling there. A brief view of human skin here and there, until it became apparent to the boys that they were in the presence of 6 to 10 unknown creatures watching them from overhead. And as the boys panicked in their haste to get out of the water, the creatures on the hill began to scurry. They began to break their cover. And as they did so, they allowed themselves to be seen. They were tiny humans with red hair, white skin, and they apparently meant no harm. They had simply come down to see what all the noise was and the splashing about. And you know, it's not just Filipinos who have seen these creatures near the jungle areas. Also, Filipino military personnel and American military personnel have all had eyewitness accounts of sightings or interactions with these beings. And I think it's important to keep in mind that the archaeological record does show the existence of these hominids, or whatever you would call them. Homo florensia, I believe it is, did inhabit this area roughly 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. Perhaps the data is wrong. Perhaps it was not quite so long ago. Perhaps it was only 4,000, 6,000 years ago. And could they have gone underground to escape some cataclysm, like, say, a global flood, a worldwide flood, a mud flood, a biblical flood, an asteroid impact, a cataclysmic volcanic eruption, an ice age, or all of the above? Food for thought. How would I know? I'm nobody. I'm just some dude on the internet talking about some stuff. Just another nobody. A bum. And the scum of the earth. Alright. I'm Frank from Universal Secret, and this has been Tales of the Pendak. See you next time.